She rolled down the window of her luxury SUV and told me to just unload around her. It was the worst mistake of her life. Because we didn't just unload around her. We built a 20-ton fortress of steel and concrete trapping her car, called the police, and watched her arrogant smirk turn into a complete psychological meltdown. I run a construction site. It's not a place for the fragile. It's a world of steel, concrete, and unforgiving deadlines. We were building a luxury cliffside mansion. The logistics were a nightmare. The only way up was a narrow, winding footpath. To make it work, the city granted us 2 reserved street parking spots at the bottom of the hill, strictly for heavy deliveries. These spots were our lifeline. Block them, and the entire multi-million-dollar project grinds to a bloody halt. I'm a reasonable man. If a neighbor parks there for a minute to drop off groceries, I look the other way. But if we have a scheduled delivery, you move. And most people do. They respect the heavy machinery. Most people. But then there was her. It was a Tuesday afternoon. We were expecting a massive load of lumber and steel beams. The truck was 5 minutes away. I walked down to the loading zone to secure the perimeter. And what do I find? A brand new, pristine luxury SUV, parked dead center across both of our reserved spots, completely ignoring the bright orange barricades. Inside, sitting with the engine off, was a woman, glued to her phone, completely oblivious to the world around her. I took a deep breath. I put on my best, most polite customer service smile, the one I save for city inspectors. I tapped on her window, just a gentle knock. She didn't look up. She just sighed, clearly annoyed that a peasant was interrupting her screen time. She rolled the window down exactly 2 inches, just enough to let her toxic attitude leak out. "What?" she barked, like I was a stray dog asking for scraps. I kept the smile. "Excuse me, ma'am. You're parked in a commercial loading zone. We have a heavy truck arriving in 2 minutes." I pointed to the massive signs right in front of her hood. "It's a tow-away zone. I need you to move, please." I thought logic would prevail. I thought the threat of a tow truck would trigger a basic survival instinct. Was wrong. She looked at me, then looked at the empty street behind me. And then she uttered the words that sealed her absolute doom. "Can't you guys just unload around me? Jesus, it's not that hard." She rolled the window back up, turning her back on a man who controls 20 tons of moving steel. Time seemed to stop. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the cold, dusty air. Unload around her? It's not that hard? My polite customer service smile faded. It was replaced by something else, something much darker. A brilliant, venomous plan began to form in my mind. Malicious compliance in its purest form. Just then, the ground began to shake. The deep, guttural roar of an air brake echoed down the street. The lumber truck had arrived, and I was about to give the driver his most important instructions of the year. The flatbed truck hissed to a halt, parallel to her SUV. It was loaded with enough concrete and steel to build a bunker. Big Mike, my lead crane operator, jumped out. He looked at the luxury car blocking the zone, then looked at me, confused. "Boss, we can't drop the load. There's a shiny toy in the way," Mike grumbled. I walked over, wrapping an arm around Mike's shoulder. I smiled. A real, genuine smile this time. "It's fine, Mike," I said loud enough for the wind to carry. The lady inside gave us specific verbal authorization. She requested that we just unload around her. Mike stared at me for 3 seconds. The gears turned in his head. Then a slow, malicious grin spread across his face. "Unload around her? You got it, boss." Precision drop coming right up. The diesel engine of the crane roared to life. It sounded like a dragon waking up in a concrete cave. Inside her soundproofed luxury bubble, the woman was still scrolling, totally deaf to the symphony of destruction starting outside. First up, a 2-ton pallet of cinder blocks. The crane swung it over the hood of her car. Mike was an artist. He lowered the concrete fortress exactly 4 inches from her front bumper. Thud. The impact shook the ground. The SUV bounced slightly on its expensive suspension. She didn't look up. She just turned up the volume on her radio. Classic denial. Next up, the rear. Another 2 tons of cinder blocks. Mike swung the crane around. He placed this pallet directly behind her exhaust pipe. Another 4-inch gap. Thud. Forward movement, blocked. Reverse, blocked. The walls of her cell were closing in, but we weren't done. Unload around me means 360 degrees of malicious compliance. The passenger side was pressed against a steep, rocky retaining wall. No escape there. That left the driver's side, the street side, the final gate. We brought out the forklift. It carried a bundle of 20-foot steel I-beams, pure iron. The forklift operator drove parallel to her driver's side door, slowly, methodically. He lowered the steel beams onto the asphalt. They landed with a deafening metallic clang. The steel barricade was so close to her door, a piece of paper couldn't slide between them. The fortress was complete. Front, back, side. She was entombed in 20 tons of construction material. The sudden silence of the engines shutting off was deafening. The dust began to settle. Inside the car, she finally finished her text message. She stretched and looked out her window. Instead of the open street, she was staring at a solid wall of rusted, brutal steel. Confusion washed over her face. Then, disbelief. She pulled the door handle and shoved. Clunk. The door hit the steel beam after opening half an inch. She was locked inside her own arrogance. She pushed the door again, harder this time. Bang! The steel didn't care about her designer handbag or her attitude. Then, the realization hit her. The trap wasn't a mistake. It was an execution. She scrambled over the center console, desperate, her high heels tearing into the expensive leather seats. She reached the passenger side and shoved the door. Scrape. It opened exactly 3 inches before grinding against the jagged retaining wall. Another dead end. Trapped, entombed, boxed in like a rat. That's when the horn started, a long, uninterrupted, hysterical blare. Beep. It echoed off the concrete canyon we had built. My crew stopped working. They gathered around the perimeter of the fortress, leaning on their shovels. Nobody said a word. We just watched the show. Front row seats to instant karma. She rolled down her tiny 2-inch window gap. Her voice was shrill, cracking with panic. Hey! Hey you! Move this trash right now! Trash? That was premium-grade structural steel, ma'am. I didn't answer. I walked over to the break table and picked up my thermos. I poured myself a cup of black coffee. It was lukewarm, but victory made it taste like the finest roast. I stood 20 feet away, sipping my coffee, making direct eye contact with her through the steel cage. I'm calling the police! You hear me? You're going to jail! I just gave her a polite nod and took another sip. She disappeared from the window. The horn finally stopped. She was grabbing her phone. The game was escalating. She thought the cops would be her saviors. She thought she was the victim. But in the construction world, the law doesn't care about your tears. It cares about permits. And my permits? They were flawless. While she cried to the dispatcher, I walked to my office trailer to prepare the heavy artillery. The trap was sprung. Now it was time to lock it. Inside the trailer, the air was thick with blueprints and dust. My sanctuary. I opened the rusted filing cabinet, drawer C. For city logistics, I pulled out a thick manila folder, the golden ticket. It contained every signed, stamped, and paid-for document giving me absolute dominion over that street. I grabbed my clipboard, stepped back outside, and waited for the sirens. Inside the steel tomb, her phone call was a masterclass in manipulation. She wasn't a trespasser blocking a multi-million-dollar site. No. To the 911 dispatcher, she was a helpless woman, violently imprisoned by aggressive construction thugs. She spun a web of lies. "They're threatening me. They dropped concrete on my car. I fear for my life." It was a good performance, almost Oscar-worthy, but there's a fatal flaw in lying to the police. Eventually, they show up, and they look at the evidence. 10 minutes later, the wail of a siren pierced the air. A black and white patrol car pulled up to the edge of the loading zone. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting cautiously on their belts. They were expecting a riot. Instead, they found a quiet, highly organized construction site, and one extremely expensive SUV perfectly boxed in like a museum exhibit. The older officer, a veteran with tired eyes, walked up to the steel barricade. He shined his flashlight into the 2-inch gap. She immediately started screaming through the glass. "Arrest them! They tried to kill me!" The officer didn't flinch. He just sighed. He'd seen every type of crazy in this city. He turned away from the car and looked around. "Who's the site manager?" he boomed. I stepped out of the shadows, clipboard tucked neatly under my arm. "That would be me, officer," I said. Professional, respectful. I didn't point fingers, I didn't yell. I let my paperwork do the talking. The officer looked at me, then at the steel cage. "Care to explain what's going on here, son?" I handed in the clipboard. "Just following instructions, sir." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Instructions?" I nodded towards the trapped SUV. The lady parked illegally in our reserved, permitted heavy loading zone. We had a critical delivery of structural steel arriving. We asked her to move. I paused, letting the silence hang. She refused and told us to, quote, "just unload around her." The young rookie officer standing behind the veteran suddenly choked back a laugh. The veteran officer shot the rookie a glare, but I could see the corner of his own mustache twitching. He looked down at the clipboard. The permits were ironclad. We owned that street. He looked back at the woman screaming inside the car, then looked at me. The trap was legal. The execution was flawless. The veteran officer handed me back my clipboard. He'd seen enough. He walked slowly back to the steel barricade, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He leaned in close to the 2-inch gap in her window. The flashing lights painted his face in harsh red and blue. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any sympathy. "Can I see your license and registration?" She stopped screaming. Confusion washed over her. My license? Why? Arrest him." "Ma'am, you called 911 claiming you were being violently assaulted," the officer replied calmly. "I arrived to find you parked illegally in a permitted commercial zone, obstructing a heavy load." Her jaw dropped. The victim card had just been violently declined. "But they trapped me. They built a wall around me," she stammered, pointing at the steel. The officer didn't miss a beat. "The site manager informed me that you specifically requested they unload around you. Is that true, ma'am?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Silence. The kind of absolute, suffocating silence that only guilt can produce. She couldn't deny it. My crew had heard it. Big Mike had heard it. She finally shoved her driver's license through the tiny gap. Her hand was shaking. The officer walked back to his cruiser to run her plates. I took another sip of my coffee. Filing a false police report is a crime. She was about to learn how expensive arrogance could be. 5 minutes later, the officer returned. He had a yellow pad in his hand, a citation pad. He began writing, slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of the pen was a nail in her coffin. He folded the ticket and slipped it through the window crack. It fell onto her lap like a dead bird. "That's a citation for parking in a commercial zone and obstructing a permitted heavy load," he said. She stared at the ticket. Her brain couldn't process the reality where she wasn't the center of the universe. "Fine," she shrieked. "I got your stupid ticket. Now tell his goons to move this metal so I can leave." The officer looked at me. I could see the question in his eyes. He knew she was awful, but technically, she had to move her car now. "Can you move the barricade, sir, so the vehicle can vacate?" he asked me. I took one last sip of my coffee. I looked at my watch. It was 12:01 p.m. A slow, predatory smile crept across my face. The absolute checkmate was ready. "I'm sorry, officer," I lied smoothly. "I can't do that." The woman gasped inside her cage. The officer frowned. "Why not?" he asked. I pointed to the silent, towering crane.
"Union rules, officer," I said loud enough for her to hear. "It's noon. My crane operator is on his mandatory legally protected lunch break." I tapped my clipboard. "If I force him back into the cab before 1 p.m., the union will shut down my entire site." The officer looked at Big Mike, who raised his sandwich in a cheerful salute. The officer turned back to the car. He actually had to hide a smile this time. "Well, ma'am," the officer said through the crack, "looks like you're going to be here for another hour." An hour! 60 minutes trapped in a luxury metal box, surrounded by dirt and mocking construction workers. She lost her mind, completely and utterly. "I have a spa appointment. You can't keep me here. It's kidnapping." The officer's patience evaporated. The amusement was gone. The badge took over. "Ma'am, lower your voice immediately," he ordered, his hand resting on his belt. "You are not being kidnapped. You parked illegally. They accommodated your ridiculous request. Now you wait. If you continue to scream and cause a public disturbance, I will pull you out of that window and arrest you." That shut her up. The thread of cold steel on her wrists finally broke through her entitlement. She slumped back into her leather seat, defeated, crying hot tears of pure humiliation. The officer turned to me. "When the hour is up, move the steel so a tow truck can hook her up." I blinked. "A tow truck? Sir, she can just drive away when we move the front block." The veteran officer gave me a look that was pure, unfiltered, malicious compliance. "Negative," the officer said smoothly. "She is parked in a tow-away zone. The citation mandates a tow. She doesn't get to just drive away. The vehicle must be impounded. City protocol." I stared at him. The master of revenge had just been outplayed by a city cop. I slowly smiled. "Protocol is protocol, officer. We'll wait for the tow." The officer nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and walked back to his cruiser. Inside the cage, she heard everything. She realized the nightmare wasn't ending. It was evolving. Her precious SUV wasn't just trapped. It was about to be dragged away to a dirty impound lot, and she was going to have to pay hundreds of dollars to get it back. We sat there for an hour, eating sandwiches, drinking coffee, enjoying the beautiful California sun, while she baked inside a metal box with the engine off. At exactly 1 p.m., a standard city tow truck arrived. The driver jumped out, hooked up his chains, and looked at the setup. He shook his head. "I can't tow this," he said. "I need the heavy-duty rig." The standard tow truck driver crossed his arms, staring at the concrete and steel puzzle. "If I hook her up from the front and drag her out, the angle will rip the entire bumper off," he said. "I'm not taking liability for a $90,000 car. You need the rotator rig." Inside the car, the woman's eyes widened in fresh horror. "A rotator?" The police officer nodded. "Call it in. Special equipment dispatch. Special equipment." Those two words meant one thing in city logistics: expensive. A standard tow costs maybe $200. A heavy-duty rotator rig? That starts at $800 an hour. Just to show up. And guess who gets the bill for the city's special dispatch? Not me. My permits were paid for. The woman rolled down her window again. Her voice was weak now. Defeated. "Please," she whispered. "Just move the steel. Let me drive away. I'm sorry, an apology. The rarest currency in the world of the entitled. But the gears of justice were already turning, and they don't have a reverse switch. The officer shook his head. Too late, ma'am. The vehicle is officially impounded in the system. If he moves the steel and you drive off, that's fleeing an impound. That's a felony. A felony. She slumped against the steering wheel, trapped by her own arrogance, and now by the law. I walked over to Big Mike. Lunch is over, Mike. Move the front block. Let's give the city some room to work. Mike climbed into the crane. The diesel engine roared back to life. He lifted the 2-ton concrete pallet from the front of her car and swung it away, but left the sides and rear. She had a window to the world now, but she couldn't drive forward. The police cruiser was blocking the exit. We waited another 30 minutes. The afternoon sun was baking the asphalt. Inside her car, it must have been 100 degrees, but she didn't dare turn on the engine for AAC. She knew the exhaust was blocked by 2 tons of concrete. Carbon monoxide is a quiet killer, so she sat in her silent, sweltering oven, paying for her sins in sweat. Then the ground trembled again. But this time, it wasn't my lumber truck. It was the heavy cavalry, the rotator. It looked less like a tow truck and more like a military recovery vehicle. Massive hydraulic outriggers, a rotating boom crane, and enough towing capacity to pull a tank. The cavalry had arrived, and they were about to send her an astronomical bill. The rotator operator jumped out of his cab. He looked at the trapped SUV and let out a long whistle. Now that is a work of art, he told me, admiring Big Mike's concrete placement. I nodded. We aim for precision in the construction business. The operator grabbed heavy canvas straps. I gotta lift her straight up. She's completely pinned. He walked over to the car and knocked on the glass. The woman jumped. Ma'am, you need to exit the vehicle. He shouted. I can't hoist it with an occupant inside. Exit the vehicle. The word she had been dreading. She couldn't open the door. The steel I-beam was still blocking it. The operator looked at me. I gestured to the forklift driver. Move the beam. Let the lady out. With a screech of tearing metal, the forklift dragged the heavy beam away. The cage was finally open. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped the queen of arrogance. It was a walk of shame of epic proportions. Her designer heels sank immediately into the thick construction mud. Her immaculate outfit was drenched in sweat. Her makeup was running down her face like black tears. And she had an audience, 30 construction workers standing in complete, mocking silence. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. She just stared at the ground, clutching her purse. The rotator operator didn't waste time. He slid the heavy canvas straps under the SUV's wheels. He connected them to the massive hook on the crane. Then, he pulled the hydraulic lever. With a deep, mechanical groan, the $90,000 car was lifted straight up into the air. She let out a pathetic squeak, watching her precious status symbol dangle helplessly. The crane swung it over the concrete walls and carefully lowered it onto the flatbed of the tow truck. The physical removal of her arrogance was complete. She marched up to the tow truck driver. I'm riding in the cab with you, she demanded. The driver laughed, a rough, gravelly sound. Insurance says no passengers, lady. City policy. So how am I supposed to get to the impound lot? She shrieked. The police officer stepped forward. You can call a cab, ma'am. There's a gas station a mile down the hill, a mile. Walking in designer heels, down a steep, dirty construction road. She looked at me one last time, pure, undiluted hatred in her eyes. I smiled, tipped my hard hat. Have a safe walk, ma'am. Watch out for the heavy machinery. She turned and started walking. Every step was a stumble. Every step was a punishment. We watched her shrink into a tiny dot in the distance, while her car was driven away to an expensive prison. She only made it 20 steps down the dirt road. Then we heard a sharp snap. Her designer heel broke off entirely. She stumbled and fell hard into the dry, dusty mud. That was it, the final straw. The thread of her sanity snapped right along with that shoe. She slowly stood up. She took off the broken shoes, and she turned back around. Her face was an unrecognizable mask of absolute, unhinged fury. She marched back up the hill, ignoring the sharp rocks cutting her feet. She was making a beeline straight for me. "This is your fault," she screamed, her voice cracking like shattered glass. She raised her heavy, studded designer purse like a medieval flail, aiming right for my head. I didn't even flinch. I just took a drag of my cigarette, because I knew the veteran police officer was standing exactly 2 feet to my left. The officer stepped in, raising his arm to block. The heavy purse slammed into his shoulder. Time froze. Assaulting a police officer. The cardinal sin. The officer's eyes went cold. The tired veteran was gone. The enforcer had arrived. Before she could swing again, he grabbed her wrist. He twisted her arm behind her back with practiced precision. She hit the dusty hood of my truck face first. Slam! "Ma'am, you are under arrest for assaulting a police officer." His voice boomed over the construction site. And there it was, the sweetest sound in the world. Click. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapping shut around her wrists. The psychological meltdown was complete. She wasn't just crying now, she was wailing. She watched helplessly as the young rookie officer dragged her towards the back of the police cruiser. Her head was pushed down, and she was shoved into the claustrophobic back seat. Through the barred window of the cop car, she saw her precious SUV. The massive rotator tow truck blasted its horn, carrying her $90,000 ego down the hill. The police cruiser turned on its siren and followed right behind it. A majestic parade of instant karma, leaving the construction site. Big Mike walked up next to me, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Think she learned her lesson, boss?" He chuckled. I took a final drag of my cigarette and flicked it into the dirt. "People like her never learn, Mike," I said softly. "But they sure do pay." I turned around. "All right, boys, the circus is over. Let's pour some concrete." The site went back to its brutal, deafening routine. But I couldn't stop thinking about the math. Let's break down the cost of her 2-inch window gap. Parking citation in a commercial heavy loading zone, $350. Special dispatch for the heavy-duty rotator tow truck, $800. City impound fee for a luxury vehicle, plus overnight storage because she spent the night in a jail cell. Let's call that another $400. But the real kicker? Assaulting a police officer, bail money, court fees, and a criminal defense attorney to keep her out of state prison. She was looking at $10,000 to $15,000. Easily. All because she couldn't park 50 yards down the street and walk for a minute. The next day, we poured the concrete. The foundation of the mansion was set. We never saw her or her shiny SUV on our hill again. Word travels fast in wealthy neighborhoods. The tow-away signs suddenly gained a lot of respect. Some people think the world revolves around them. They think their convenience overrides your livelihood. They build an invisible wall of entitlement around themselves, expecting everyone else to bend. But the beautiful thing about construction is that we are very good at building walls too. And our walls are made of steel and concrete and consequence. So next time someone asks you to just work around them, smile, agree to it, and then build them exactly the cage they asked for. This is Marcus. If you enjoyed watching a 20-ton dose of karma crush an entitled ego, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story. Because out there in the world, there are thousands of people parked where they shouldn't be. And sooner or later, the tow truck comes for us all. Until next time, stay sharp, follow the rules, and don't mess with the people building your city.